Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. This is the 7th seminar of this Michaelmas term. And today we're happy to, and we are pleased to welcome our speaker, which is Dr. Gaston Yalonetzky from the University of Leeds. Today he will be talking about a very important topic for measurement, for poverty measurement in particular, entitled Endogenous Weights and Multidimensional Poverty, a Cautionary Tale. Gaston, it's a lecturer in economics at the University of Leeds Business School, and he is also a research associate at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. He has several publications in renowned journals on development studies. He holds a deep field in economics from the University of Oxford, and I'm happy to to participate in this seminar with him. So before giving the floor, a couple of remarks as usual, just to let you know that this is a fully online seminar. So we are happy to receive any comments or questions through the chat box. You can do it, there is a chat box in this platform. We appreciate if you could be concise so that we can hear from as many people as possible. And lastly, just to remind you that this session is going to be fully recorded and it's going to be available at the office website. If you are interested in this work of endogenous weights and multidimensional poverty, is going to be also a part of the OPHI working papers soon. But without further delay, I just welcome you, Gaston, and happy to give you the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Hector, and thank you very much, OPHI, for the invitation. And obviously, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Please let me know one way or another if you can see the screen.
Yes, it's now we can see the presentation.
Perfect, thank you very much. Okay, so as Hector mentioned, the title of the paper is Endogenous Weights and Multidimensional Poverty, a Cautionary Tale. And this is a joint work with Indranil Datta from University of Manchester and from Ricardo Nogales, who is with us today from OPHI. Well, I'm just gonna delete this thing, okay. So as many of you know, those of you who are familiarized with multidimensional poverty measurement and especially with the counting approach, you know, there's a lot of ethical and methodological choices that practitioners have to undertake, you know, when they want to do this assessment, right? So for example, the choice of the well-being dimensions and the indicators for each dimension, that's a very important decision. And also how to combine the different variables and indicators into a single composite index, if that's what you want to do. You know, some people prefer not to do that or to do different things, but if you want to do that, there's a whole decision to be made of how to combine, how to aggregate. And in the case of many composite indices, and definitely in the counting approach, one of those big decisions is how much weight we should assign to each indicator. So broadly speaking, there are two big families of weights from which you can choose. One is exogenous weights. This could be just, you know, you just pick and choose arbitrarily, or more thoughtfully, you can use participatory methods based on expert opinion, preferences of policymakers. There's a whole host of methods. But the key thing about them is that the weights do not depend on the data set that then you're going to use to compute the poverty indices. So they are independent of the data. And alternatively, you have endogenous weights, which pretty much, as the name says, they are a function of the data, in this case of your deprivation matrix, for instance. And there are pros and cons to each option. So essentially, this paper dwells a bit on the cons on endogenous weights. That's where the cautionary tale is about, because there's definitely some good things to say about using endogenous weights, but there are also problems. And what we want to do is want to explore those problems and offer cautionary advice, saying you have to be aware of these things if you go down this route, because we've noticed that except for some in passing exceptions, in general, people just use this, and I'm not sure if they really think hard about what's going on when you make these choices. Endogenous weights, the family of endogenous weights can also be broadly divided into two types. First, you have so-called data reduction factorial techniques, which are common also in latent variable models and things like that. The principal component analysis, multiple correspondence analysis, and several other similar techniques. And then you can also have endogenous weights based on the frequency of deprivation in each indicator. So for instance, there is a so-called inverse frequency weight, whereby if a particular deprivation in an indicator increases, like more people are deprived in that indicator, then the weight is supposed to go down. Right, and there are justifications to doing that. Some people say, well, if everyone is deprived in this, then that indicator is not really helping us to single out the really deprived people anymore. I mean, I'm not saying that's the right way to go. I'm just saying that's a typical justification, and there may be situations where you may want to do that or not. But you also have direct frequency weights, where the reasoning is a bit the opposite. Methodologically speaking, the idea here is that if more people are deprived in a particular indicator, the weight of that indicator goes up. And some people may justify saying, well, maybe this should carry higher weight because it's obviously becoming like a prominent feature of poverty or something like that. This is just examples. I'm not taking a position. I'm not saying this is good, this is bad. I'm just describing. So as I was saying, except for some brief remarks or conjectures, and I say incomplete in the sense that they haven't done the whole analysis, just express the intuition, which is good, which is very good. But except for that, there's no thorough theoretical assessment, let alone empirical assessment, of the implications of using endogenous weights on the fulfillment of key desirable properties by these multidimensional poverty indices, especially the ones based on counting functions, which is basically, it's a really old method. I mean, I didn't know this, but recently I read in one of these good reviews on multidimensional poverty and inequality measures that apparently counting poverty measures go back at least the 1950s in Italy. I didn't know that. I knew, as far as I used to go, was 1979, Townsend, Peter Townsend's book on poverty in the UK, not Peter Townsend from The Who, the other Peter Townsend. And but actually goes further back. But of course, we know that it was a bit forgotten, so to speak, until well, Sabina Alkar with James Foster and Conchita Ambrosio with Satya Chakrabarty as well. In the academic world, they brought back and Walter Bossert as well, they brought back all these counting functions for binary variables, and it's very bourgeoning now. I mean, the MPI from the UNDP with support from OPHI, it's a big deal now. So it really matters, to look at the properties of these things and look at the pros and cons. So what we do show, this is the take-home message, is that multidimensional poverty indices, based on a very broad class of endogenous weights, which include frequency weights, factorial techniques weights, they violate the key properties of monotonicity and subgroup consistency. We will discuss a bit more what I mean by these properties, but just to give you an idea, because monotonicity is really important. Monotonicity, well, different versions, but essentially it says if one person becomes deprived in a particular indicator, like they lose electricity access, then poverty in the whole society should not decrease. Ideally should increase. Should actually increase. So should not decrease, but should increase. But so with this type of poverty measures with endogenous weights, we will have situations where this person loses electricity and poverty goes down, which is exactly what you don't want if you are happy with the monotonicity property. So that's the type of cautionary tale that we're trying to say. We're saying, in a sense, what we're saying is, if you use endogenous weights, you cannot measure absolute poverty. At best, you can measure some notion of relative poverty that you will need to develop conceptually speaking, ethically speaking, you know, which is fine, but you cannot really measure absolute poverty if you use endogenous weights. I mean, we're touching the surface here. I mean, it's a really deep mathematical and ethical problem, but this is just the first attempt at approaching it. And in fact, we didn't develop this that much, but we show in the paper a bit that even depending on the function that you use to identify the poor, the poverty identification function, these measures may even violate the focus axiom, which basically says that whatever happens to the non-poor, as long as they remain non-poor, they shouldn't affect the poverty measure. So if you use endogenous weights to identify the poor, you even violate the focus axiom. It gets even messier. And actually, there's a paper published in World Development that they did exactly that, and clearly the referees didn't realize that, which is, it happens all the time, but it's a serious issue. Like, there's stuff published there that it's violating these really key axioms and what you know. Okay, so we do acknowledge the merits of using endogenous weights. We are not claiming, we're not saying you should throw this, you know, they should go to the dustbin. No, not at all. What we're saying is that there are drawbacks of these choices, and they should be known, they should be researched and discussed. We feel that the discussions have been very superficial so far. So we show some theoretical results about how exactly the violations of these properties happen. And we also show some very nice empirical examples. I think they're really nice. And they're mainly Ricardo, amazing how he did this. You'll see the graphs. I'm really in love with those. And how we show the violations. Like, it's really, really clear over there. And well, why this is important, I will just go through this a bit quickly, but what we want to show in this slide is that endogenous weights are pervasive. They're used in academia. There's a lot of papers on endogenous weights, and also in policy, like the Prospera conditional cash transfer program in Mexico uses PCA for targeting purposes. So it's even affecting policy, like real life stuff, not just our nice ivory towers in academia. There's lots of examples. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to, but just want to convey that this is quite pervasive. It's quite popular. But also it's important because in comparative exercises, comparing regions, comparing across time, or before and after policy evaluation using these indices, they can be compromised. It can be difficult if these indices violate key properties that you take for granted. Monotonicity and also subgroup consistency. Subgroup consistency in the sense that if you have two societies and each one has two groups, you know, I don't know, you're comparing, let's say, Alabama and Missouri in the United States, and you have white population, African-American population on each, let's say, and let's say Alabama is less poor, Alabama white people are less poor than Missouri white people, and African-American people in Alabama are less poor than African-American people in Missouri, then you would expect that when you combine the two people, that Alabama appears less poor than Missouri. That's subgroup consistency. There are different definitions of subgroup consistency, yeah? If you use endogenous weights, that's not guaranteed. It also violates subgroup consistency. Okay, so if you like these properties, then it's a problem that endogenous weights violate these properties, and that's what we're trying to highlight. I mean, you can still decide to use them, but obviously we're just trying to warn people. And actually, there's a strand of the literature that endorses endogenous weight. They say this is what you should use, and they give some good reasons. I'm not challenging their reasons at all, but we're saying is it's not a free lunch. It comes with costs. And where this paper is about the costs. And there was a debate that was not exactly about this alone. It was a broader issue. about statistical methods versus a normative approach and so forth, where Mariana Santos from OPHI was involved, and many of you are aware of this, many of you know of this. There was this exchange in the Journal of Development Studies a few years ago, or a year or two ago. Yeah, so it's happening. So, okay, so this is the gist of it. If you need to go now, this is essentially what the paper is about. I'm aware that it's lunchtime. Well, here in England, I don't know. People are calling from different parts of the world, but I'll try to be mild on the notation. I'll try to go easy on the maths. My main hope is that the gist of the message will be caught from the really nice graphs that we have to offer to share with you. But there will be some equations will have to be there, I'm afraid. But I'll try to be as nice as possible with those. So basically, well, think about this deprivation matrix. So you have individuals in the rows and dimensions or variables in the columns. And this row and D can take either 0 or 1 value. So we're not in a fuzzy set world. We're in a very discrete world. Either you are deprived in dimension D, person N in this case, or in which case you have a value of 1, or you are not deprived in D, in which case you have a value of 0. Yeah. And we're going to have two sets of weights, the W weights, which are going to be potentially endogenous. They could be endogenous. And then the weights V, which will only be exogenous. And you will see why we have two sets of weights. Those are the weights that we will use to generate the counting from the scores, for instance. Okay. And we will just simply talk about this idea of an increase in deprivation in dimension J of individual I. This is going to appear later, but it's basically saying what happens if individual I becomes deprived in dimension J. So don't worry about the rest of the notation. So we're going to use the counting approach, pretty much the Alcar and Foster framework combined with Chakrabarty and Ambrosio if you want, but basically the type of applied to binary indicators. We'll have a poverty identification function, which is going to be this psi, which is just a function that takes the value of 1 if you are poor, 0 if you are not poor. And essentially the function compares a weighted sum of deprivations against a threshold K, usual, where the weights are exogenous, V. And we use exogenous weights at this stage because if you don't, and you use an intermediate approach to identification, then you violate the focus axiom, which is what this paper I was telling you about in world development. But we don't want to violate the focus axiom. I mean, we could, but that's already too many complications at the same time. So we use these exogenous weights to identify the poor. They can vary, but exogenously. Okay. And then we're going to have this severity component. So among the poor, how poor they are, which is this function S, which is going to be a function of the counting score, the weighted sum of deprivations. And the counting score is here in the middle, and it's your usual, the weight D times rho and D for each D, right? And these weights can be endogenous. This is where the endogeneity can come in. And the severity function is going to be a convex function usually, or linear or convex, going from 0 to 1. Yeah, typical. This is typical in the literature. And then at the bottom, you can see the bottom is very important. The little p of person N is the individual poverty function, which is the product of the identification function times the severity function. So psi can be 1 or 0, and S can be a real number between 0 and 1. And it's a positive function of the counting score, the C, the weighted sum of deprivations. And then we will also have a social poverty function, pretty standard in the literature, additively decomposable, satisfying the population principle, which is essentially a social average of the individual poverty functions. So big P is going to be a function of the deprivation matrix and a function of the threshold used to identify the poor. Yeah, so this is standard in this literature. Okay, and we will have we're going to focus on monotonicity and subgroup consistency. These are the axioms whose violation by these endogenous weights we are proving in this paper. It's the whole purpose of the paper. And monotonicity simply says that if one person becomes deprived in a dimension, then poverty should not go down, should ideally increase, but we're using a weak version where we say poverty should not decrease, so higher or equal to 0, the change. Delta P is the change in poverty. And subgroup consistency is what I said about Alabama and Missouri, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I said it already. There are different examples of endogenous weights. I'm going to skip this. We don't really need that, but this is an example because don't worry about it. This is just extra content just in case. So let me just discuss the empirical illustration, which is essentially the empirical proof of violation. And if there is time and interest, I'm also happy to discuss some of the theoretical results. The theoretical results, but just very briefly, just to mention in case there's no time or whatever, the theoretical results hinge on this idea of what we call a measurement externality. Essentially, and this is very intuitive, I hope, when you have endogenous weights, whatever happens to your neighbor, maybe they lose electricity or they have access to drinking water, for instance, whatever happens to your neighbor will affect your measurement of poverty. Your individual poverty measure will be affected. That's the externality. So in the eyes of the policymaker, in the eyes of the academic, in the eyes of the practitioner, your poverty value will change, even though nothing happened to you. Nothing happened to you. You remain the same, but the neighbor was affected. So because it's an implicitly relative measure of poverty, everyone's scores gets affected. And what we show exactly how the scores get affected. That's the funny bit that the pretty bit that we like about the results, is that we manage to track exactly how the effects happen, because people get affected differently, and we explain how. But it's actually quite intuitive, but you have to go there. So we'll see if we have time. Otherwise, I think the empirical results are our main protagonist, to be honest. But just before I go into the empirical results, just to complete that idea, as a reminder, with exogenous weights, weights that do not depend on the data set, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Whatever happens with your neighbor only affects your neighbor's poverty measure. Your poverty measure remains the same because nothing happened to you, and this is the implicit ethical judgment. So the person computing the index, that's what they see. So that's the big difference, yeah? And you can already see that, obviously, if you're interested in absolute poverty, then an exogenous approach seems to be more reasonable in that context. Okay, so let's continue. So the empirical illustrations. So what we do is we use different endogenous weights and also exogenous weights for two countries. We use Uganda and Ecuador. And we simulate the changes in the number of people depriving particular indicators, and we see how the indices respond. So it's very simple trick. I mean, I like the way we've executed it, but the idea is not that complicated. Okay, so we use Ecuador's Living Conditions Survey 2013-14 and Uganda's National Panel Survey 2015-16. The sample sizes appear there. Ecuador's survey is quite large, the sample size. Here's the choice of dimensions. It's pretty much following the global MPI 2018. I'm not going to go through all the details, but we can, later, if you want, we can discuss each indicator. But to be honest, the result, we know theoretically that the result would still happen. I mean, the chances are that if we do this with different indicators, we will still get these violations. But I essentially have health, education, living standards, pretty much what the UNDP does. So it's very similar indicators. There might be some adjustments, but it's very much there. So you have education, health, and living standards. And there's this indication of nutrition. And this is the one that we're going to target. We also tried results with different, we did simulations with other indicators, and we get similar qualitative results. We get violations across the board. Okay, but we work with the results we present now are on nutrition. So we're going to consider the union approach to poverty identification. Again, so that we don't need to choose the exogenous weight for identification, and we don't want to violate the focus axiom, because then you're adding an extra disturbance to the system, you know, an extra distraction. And we compute adjusted headcount ratios. So this linear, really linear functions. So this is the poverty measure at the bottom, the social poverty measure, which is going to be this, the population, sorry, the sample in this case, but you know, the average of the individual poverty functions, which is psi, time, where k is equal to 0, union approach, times the score. So the intensity function is linear, it's just the score, the counting score. So because it's the union approach, we're just averaging the scores. This is also very clean in the sense that remember that the endogenous weights enter through the score. So because we don't want to violate the focus axiom, and therefore this is, I think, this is the cleanest way I think we can show the violations. And we consider 3 weighting schemes. So we use exogenous weighting using equal weights for each dimension and equal weights within dimension for each indicator following the global MPI. This is our benchmark. The exogenous weights are supposed to fulfill the axioms. So, and you will see how they fulfill the axioms. So this is for comparison purposes. We also do endogenous weighting with a principal component analysis based on tetrachoric correlations, because we have binary indicators. So you cannot just use normal PCA. I mean, you can, but the results are not appropriate. So you have to tweak with that. And we also use inverse frequency weights for another type of endogenous weights. And this is the type of function we use, but it's just inverse frequency weights. Don't worry about the equation there. But basically, if the proportion of people depriving electricity increases, then the weight of electricity goes down. That's an inverse frequency weight. So we use that as well. And here, and so how does this simulation go? Basically, we add random deprivations in nutrition. So we divide, we also do water and electricity. This is what I was saying, but we're not reporting them here. So we divide the sample of people without nutrition deprivation into ventiles. So yeah, we have the ventiles, the 5 ventiles, it's 5 ventiles or so, ventiles. Or 20 ventiles. Yeah, sorry, silly me. And or 19, whatever. So we generate these random ventiles, and we choose one by one, and we assign deprivation to each random ventile. So for example, we start assigning the deprivation in nutrition to 5%, to the first one ventile, and we compute the poverty measures for all the possible weights. Then we go back to that population where 5% have already been randomly assigned deprivation in nutrition, and we take another 5% of those who were not deprived in nutrition, and we also assign deprivation in nutrition. So now we have 10% of the population deprived in nutrition of those who were not deprived originally. Yeah? And then the same 20%, 30%, all the way to 95%. So we incrementally add simulation. It's a simulation. We add nutrition deprivations to people who were not deprived. And for each sample, for each new sample, we compute the poverty indices with the 3 alternative weighting vectors again. Okay. And in the case of violations of subgroup consistency, we do the exercise, but the target populations for the simulations are concentrated in only one region of the country. So we choose Eastern Uganda in the case of Uganda, and Ecuador's coast in the case of Ecuador. And the idea being that if subgroup consistency held, whatever change in poverty you see in Ecuador's coast should be replicated in Ecuador overall. They should move in the same direction, whether they go up or down. They should move in the same direction. If they don't, there's a violation of subgroup consistency. Okay, so are you ready? Here we go. Results. This is the meat. This is Ecuador violation of monotonicity. So on the horizontal axis, we have the samples with the proportions of people who've been given the random deprivations in nutrition. I mean, it starts with 0 when you don't do the simulations, and then we start adding. Of those who were not deprived of nutrition, we had 5%, 10%. That's horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis, we have the social poverty measure. And we have the leftmost panel is exogenous weights, the middle panel is PCA with tetrachoric correlations, and the rightmost panel is inverse frequency weights. So first, if you look at the exogenous weights, well, we have poverty increasing as we increase deprivations in nutrition randomly and in a simulation. This is what you would expect if the property of monotonicity is fulfilled. But now see what happens with PCA. Everything starts fine. And then after we're about like the 30% of people with fictitious deprivation in nutrition, then things, more, almost 40%. Then poverty starts falling, then goes up again, completely erratic. And then at some point it keeps falling, which doesn't make any sense. And in fact, you can see the shaded areas, the shaded rectangles are the points where monotonicity is violated. Okay, and you can see that this is a violation of monotonicity. And with frequency weight, the violation has even like some underlying mechanical principle. I'm sure there's a mathematical formula going on here, because this is frequency weights are the formulas are neater, are more close form type of formulas. You have a parabola here. It goes up at a decreasing rate and then starts falling. So it doesn't make any sense. I mean, from this normative point of view, I mean, from a relative poverty point of view, it may make a lot of sense maybe. But if you were measuring absolute poverty, this doesn't make any sense, I think. Now, Uganda, similar story. You see the shaded bars. These are violations of monotonicity. Poverty should increase, at least should not decrease, and it actually decreases. These are small decreases, but still nonetheless. And compared to the exogenous case where it just keeps going up monotonically. And the frequency weights, again, we see this nice parabola. So, I mean, we didn't do this derivation of exactly this, but you could actually, it looks as though you could actually show mathematically that as you increase this, there's a parabolic relationship here, which I find quite interesting. But anyway, the main point, regardless, is that monotonicity is being violated. Sorry. What about subgroup consistency? So in subgroup consistency, the axes are the same, horizontal and vertical, but what you need to look is the following. The red line, the red line is the national poverty level, and the blue line is the regional poverty level. In the case of Ecuador, is the coast. So we are making the simulation on the coast. So in the exogenous case, poverty in the coast goes up because more people are deprived of nutrition, and the national measure, which includes, in the case of Ecuador, obviously the highlands and the rainforest, the Amazon, right? So it also keeps going up. It tracks, it follows it. But then see what happens when we do the same thing for PCA. Well, first, the lines don't go up, but we kind of knew that in the sense that they are violating monotonicity. But the important thing is that they don't go together. They are not, where in the exogenous case, they move together in unison. In the case of PCA and frequencies, even starker, there's plenty of instances where the regional measure went up and the national measure did not go up, went down. And that's inconsistency. Just in case, I was realizing, because I was looking at the, this is before we get scared. I was looking at the exogenous case and I was saying that the Ecuadorian coast has more poverty than the national average, and it didn't look right. And then I remember, and I have to tell you this, that there are two vertical axes. And I'm sure Ricardo is nodding now when I say it. Because it's very, very clever the way he put this. On the leftmost vertical axis, we have national poverty, and on the rightmost, we have regional poverty, in this case, the Ecuadorian coast. So you can see actually that the coast of Ecuador on average has less poverty than the whole country. Yeah. But anyway, that's just a detail also to remember that there are two axes, but vertical. But the point is all the shaded rectangles where you see violations of subgroup consistency. And we get the same story with Uganda. Same story with Uganda, violations, just a bunch for PCA. PCA seems to behave better actually in number of violations for these two samples, for these two particular countries, yeah? I don't know the external validity of these results, yeah? But for frequency weights, it's disastrous, yeah? Look at this, look at the frequency weights, it's completely off. I find this very non-reassuring, you know? Why would I want to use this indices for this type of, in this context, you know? Anyway, I'm being a bit cheeky, but just because I'm aware that there's just 4 minutes left, I want to jump to the conclusions. But just quickly to show you that we also did the theoretical results, try to figure out what's going on. So let me finish with some quick conclusions because I think they are important. So what do we do? So well, we found the violations for endogenous weights, using endogenous weights of at least 2 key properties, monotonicity and subgroup consistency. But also actually focus axioms can get violated if you combine endogenous weights with intermediate approaches to poverty identification. So at least 3 properties can get violated. Yeah. And this paper, Pasha 2017, is a paper in World Development where we realized, I think I have to recheck it, but it seems that they do this thing of intermediate approach with endogenous weights. But I don't know, maybe anyway. The results also hold for broad groups of weighting functions and also including hybrid weights. Even if you have some exogenous and some endogenous, you will still get a problem. Also, if you, these results, actually these problems will happen with any measures based on weighted sums of binary indicators. So the asset indices that you find in the demographic and health surveys, you know, the work of Filbert and Prichet and so forth, all these asset indices, if you were to use them to construct social measures, you will have these problems. If not, if not, there are other issues, but if you just want to rank households, that's a separate thing. But if you want to aggregate those, you will have exactly the same problems. Exogenous weights are immune to these problems, but we are aware that they could involve arbitrary choices. But the good thing that's going on is that there's people like, for instance, Lucio Esposito and Enrica Chiapero Martinetti recently, people who are trying to use other information to generate exogenous weights. And that's something that I really like. That's a potential good way forward. So you have 2 data sets, so to speak. The data where you compute the poverty measure with your indicators, and then another source of data, it could be qualitative, quantitative, whatever, it's different people, or it doesn't matter, who will help you elicit the weights. If you don't want to, this is if you don't want to have arbitrary choices, if you don't want to have to toss a coin and say 30% or whatever. So as long as the sources of information are different, I think you can do a lot of good stuff and still have weights informed by some interesting criteria and exogenous. That's one way forward, in my opinion. Another way forward is what appears in the conclusions here, which is to compute, but I'm not so keen on this one, but I'll mention it anyway, and it's been done in the literature and also discussed in the textbook of Sabina, Suman, Maria Emma, Jose Manuel, Paola, Jane Foster, you know, that amazing textbook, but with a lot of authors. They discuss these things too. One way could be to compute endogenous weights with one particular data set or a pool of data sets, and then leave the weights fixed for future comparisons. So that also helps. But of course, the problem, there's still arbitrariness because it's which data sets do you choose and how do you combine them? So it doesn't really get rid of the arbitrariness, in my opinion, but it's an option. And you could still get violations of these axioms anytime you update the weights. When you recalculate the weights with new time periods, for instance, then you get exactly the problems we're talking about. Okay. And I think this is it. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Gaston. Very interesting topic and great presentation. We have we learned a lot and we had a good time, I may say, while listening to you. There are a few comments and then also clarifications and then questions. Let me start with a couple of clarifications. Do you, I'm not going to say the names because you can find the names in the chat box later on, and for policy, the requiring acceptance of. Anyway, one of these comments is: when do you mean violations in one of these principles? You mean dimensional monotonicity, right, or not? When you mean the violations in monotonicity, do you mean dimensional monotonicity? This is one question. And the other question is, are you using a same size population when you are comparing your exercises? Or the question may be, it matters to account for the size of the population for this exercise that you perform? These are two questions. And then another question, maybe I just give you one extra question and I leave you to reply so that we cannot accumulate that many. One extra question refers to the last topic that you mentioned, how to set weights. And there is one interesting question where it says basically, would it be consider an external weighting scheme if you consider opinions or revealed preferences obtained from the same data set? And then would that be considered endogenous, even if these are revealed preferences from the same survey or not? Let me leave you these two clarifications and then this question before moving on, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, thank you. Otherwise, I will start forgetting them. Well, first, I would like to thank very much everyone for those questions because they're very interesting and very relevant. Also, Ricardo, please help me in case I forget something or you realize something I said wasn't correct. Please do back me up, okay? I know you're listening. I don't see you, but I know you're hearing.
He's there. He's around.
Yeah. The first one, dimensional monotonicity. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because I remember in Alcar and Foster, they have, when they talk about monotonicity and different properties and even focus, I think there is, whether it's dimensional or full, and etc. I don't remember exactly the names of the properties in Alcar and Foster in the Journal of Public Economics. But I will just rephrase it and then you can tell me which one I'm referring to. But I apologize that I don't have it on top of my head. But essentially is this idea is you take one person, actually maybe it should be a poor person, and they become deprived in an additional dimension, then poverty should not, social poverty should not decrease. If the person were not poor, then they will have issues with the focus axiom, right? So it would depend on whether the person becomes poor after being deprived or not. If the person becomes poor, then poverty should not decrease either. But if the person remains non-poor, then poverty should not be affected because that's the focus axiom, right? But if there's any important distinction there that I'm missing, please do let me know. But this is the way we frame monotonicity. Just simply, you know, because we're using the union approach in the empirical application, of course, then whoever gets an extra deprivation should not decrease social poverty. So that's what we meant in that first question, but I'm not sure, I don't remember the names, but I know where they come from. It's from Alcar and Foster, mainly, if I remember well. The second one, I see, I already forgot.
Yeah, no, let me, it refers to the population size. So basically, James is mentioning again, so should we really be worried about violations of theoretical axioms, such as subgroup consistency, if the population sizes in reality are not fixed. So it concerns about.
You mean when the way the axiom is put that you compare fixed populations? I mean, there are different ways of represent the axiom. The way we implicitly actually represented it in the empirical application was that ceteris paribus, if poverty increases in a particular, if a particular region's poverty moves in a particular direction, increases, decreases, doesn't matter, and the other regions haven't changed, their poverty hasn't changed, then the total society should move according in the same direction. Poverty in the total society, it shouldn't be affected by who you pair this region with, if you like subgroup consistency. But what we show is that that doesn't happen. That poverty in the coastal region of Ecuador, for instance, keeps increasing because of the simulation, but or moves in whichever direction because the weights are endogenous, in fact, so it violates monotonicity. But the poverty in the whole population does not move in tandem, doesn't do the same moves. It goes its own way. And we think, well, if we like subgroup consistency, that's problematic. So that's in that sense. So in other words, it seems that you don't necessarily need to stick to that particular definition of the axiom where you compare similar populations, but you can just have a different view of the axiom, which is that they should move together. The region with the country should move together, and it's not happening. With exogenous weight, it happens all the time. And the third question, I like the third question a lot because it's related to the conclusion. I mean, I like all the questions, but I'm saying the last one because it was what we've been thinking lately with the conclusions. It's an excellent point. Imagine you have a data set and you have the deprivation matrix, and then you have another part of the questionnaire where you ask people, reveal preferences, which dimension is more important. Would that be endogenous? I think strictly speaking, no. In the sense that, mathematically speaking, in the sense that we're only claiming that it's endogenous when the deprivation matrix affects the weights, which is what PCA does, what the frequency weights do. But if you have a separate, even if it's the same people, actually that's probably ideal even to some extent, but it's not necessary that you don't need to have the same people answering both, but it's a nice thing if you have it. But no, that should be exogenous. That's, in my opinion, this is my personal preference, my revealed preference. In my opinion, that's actually a good thing. That I would construct poverty indices that way, and this is a bit what I think that Esposito and Enrica, Lucio and Enrica are showing, that you can do these things. I mean, it costs money, but you can do these things, Yeah, and other people, not just them.
Right. So related to this point, somebody mentioned, but aren't the endogenous weights more consistent than, for instance, expert opinions? What would be your view on this?
Yeah, that's the question. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think part of the point is that all weighting choices have pros and cons. I would find very hard to be convinced that there is a weighting scheme in particular that this is it. I mean, I have my preference. I'm showing my preferences. I'm a bit more inclined to exogenous, but I'm very ready to admit that exogenous weightings can also be problematic, absolutely. And the issue of arbitrariness is perhaps its main problem. Mm-hmm. And this is why we've been talking about these alternatives, like these papers, like Capera Martinetti with Esposito, trying to reduce that arbitrariness, to inform exogenous weighting choices with something above and beyond some expert opinion or some equal weighting type of thing. But there are way outs. But the big advantage is that if you want to measure absolute poverty, for instance, and in general, if you want to satisfy these key axioms, you got them guaranteed. Whereas with endogenous statistical weightings, yes, you do get other nice information. They may be helpful, again, if you want to measure relative poverty concepts, but then you'll have to rethink what are your real axioms. I have yet to see a single paper, and this is good research for the future, whoever's interested. I mean, the paper may be there and I missed it, typical. The papers may be there, but I haven't seen them yet. A paper that does in the counting framework, proposes new axioms for relative poverty. You know, so that so monotonicity obviously is discarded because we know it's violated, and you need to come up with something new to justify further why you're comfortable with measurement externalities, why, you know, and things like that. But it's a different type of measurement. So what we're saying is, if you because the literature is doing it, like these papers are cited in World Development and stuff. If you want to criticize the MPI, you know, I want to replicate the MPI with endogenous weights, and people are doing this, then you have these problems. Okay, fine, there are other things that the MPI may be getting wrong, or exogenous weights, but you're not realizing that you're adding all these extra problems: violation of monotonicity, violation of subgroup consistency. So the key question is, first, what type of poverty are we measuring? Are we measuring absolute poverty? Are we measuring relative poverty? And it's a big old debate. In monetary poverty is the same thing. Relative poverty lines, absolute poverty lines. Martin Ravalion, in his new book, I think, or in a book chapter, I read it recently, he talks about relative poverty lines and how they also violate monotonicity, which was known. But he shows some empirical examples in Ireland, New Zealand, and it's like, you know, it's an issue. You have to be very clear about what you want to measure.
Right. So I guess that this paper is very extremely useful, in particular for countries that are discussing how to adjust their poverty measurements. Like, for instance, Mexico has already 10 years with the same measure, and at some point, if not that, maybe it's already happening or already happened, but at some point, many countries have to decide adjustments to their poverty measurements, and one of these adjustments concerns weights. And basically what you're showing is that if you are adjusting these weights conditional on the sample size that you're using every time, then you will have a lot of problems. That's a good way. I like it a lot. And then you have these great graphs. There are two questions. One is, so in the first graphs, when you show the monotonicity, so there were very big differences in the scale of the exogenous, exactly, with respect to PCA and frequency. So you see the exogenous is 0.2, the scale goes from 0.06 to 0.2, and then in the others, in PCA and frequency, both are extremely low, but they are not that different. The question is this, is there a way to assess this with confidence intervals? Because maybe this fall in the this negative slope has very huge confidence intervals, and then maybe you cannot say anything. Is there a way to assess this in terms of this? I'm sure you did it, but because of the time, if you want to mention something.
You know, it's an excellent question. Thank you. And if Ricardo wants to add anything, obviously, Ricardo, also please feel happy to shoot. I have a couple of things to say about that. First, at the purely mathematical level, if these were populations instead of samples, the problem would still exist, that you would have, you know, violations. You know, they wouldn't, you know, the poverty would not be increasing, so and so forth. Now, of course, we have samples, but the Ecuadorian data is like more than 100,000 people. So I'm not sure if Ricardo, you can tell me. I'm not sure if we have in the background confidence interval calculations. I mean, they can be done even for the endogenous weights. You can use bootstrap methods. For the exogenous, their asymptotic methods work perfectly fine, and we know those methods, and they're in. I think they might be in the book in Sabina and James and Suman and Mariam and Jose Manuel and Paola's textbook. But I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but I'm sure that the intervals are very narrow because we're having the sample sizes are huge. I'm quite comfortable about it, and I'm not surprised that the what's the word? I mean, it's a very good observation. It's really eagle eye that you notice the axis, but I'm not surprised because I tell you what's going on partly. When with exogenous weights, you increase people's deprivation, so the poverty measure increases mainly only because of those people who use simulated and additional deprivation. Whereas in the other two cases, you have measurement externalities. So what's going to happen is there's going to be people who were originally deprived in nutrition, and there's people who in a part of the simulation who remain without the deprivation because they were not selected randomly to be given the fictional deprivation. And they will behave differently. Their poverty levels will go in different occasions, in different directions. But what's going to happen, because I don't have it on top of my head, but there's going to be a group of people whose poverty value is going to go down because of the externality.
Mm-hmm.
And that counters. So that's why the increases are less, and that's why you get lower poverty levels with endogenous weights. Because even though their deprivation vectors of these people haven't changed, their poverty levels are going down. Other people's levels are going up, but because you have people going down, if there are too many, they will dampen the value.
Mm-hmm. Ricardo wants to add something, so.
Yes, thank you very much. I won't take a lot of time. So just to mention a couple of things in terms of the weight, in terms of the standard errors. Yes, in fact, we have standard errors. They're not depicted here for the sake of simplicity, but indeed, you have different sources of standard errors, not only coming from survey sampling, but also from simulation. So basically what we're seeing here is our mean points across simulations, if you want. Of course, we'll have sampling, but I guess we're less worried about the sampling weights, but more concerned with the simulation, with the sampling standard errors, but more concerned with the simulation errors. Now, the idea of the paper is, of course, that these deprivations on average should not exist. So even though you see, for example, that some of them perhaps are not significant, you will certainly arrive at a situation where you will detect significant differences even in means. So that is what is shocking. So what we're trying to show here is that, these deprivations exist regardless of the magnitude, if you want. So when we see different axes, for example, it's of course because we're arriving at different scores computed with different methods. We could try to be cleaner and perhaps have a uniform scale, if you want, for all of them. But then we're not concerned with the magnitude, we're concerned with the existence of the violation at this point. And also, if I may just go back to the previous point about the importance of, what's the role of expert opinions when it comes to this point? Well, I would actually argue that data-driven weights are not necessarily conforming to expert opinions per se. So it depends on what kind of frequency weights you want to apply, but there are some kinds, for example, for which even if you have a very highly prevalent deprivation across the population, so everybody or a lot of people in a certain society are depriving something, then a certain kind of frequency weights will attach very low weight to that, for example. Because it is highly prevalent, it doesn't allow you to disentangle poor people from non-poor people. So by different mechanisms, they will be assigned that deprivation, although it's very highly prevalent, could be assigned a very low weight, and that is counterintuitive from a lot of people. I mean, for the general public, and of course for expert opinion. So I don't know to what extent we can actually argue that data-driven weights are more reliable in the light of in the eyes of experts. So I will leave it at that. I won't take much time. So sorry.
No, great. No, it's perfectly fine. It's great that you jump in, and it's great to have you here as part of the co-authors. I think we are about to close. I'm going to close the session. You can find other questions, and we thank all the participants, all the people that sent comments. They will be there for the authors to improve the work. I'm sure it's going to be very useful. And thank you, Gaston, for this extraordinary presentation and presenting this very relevant paper, Ricardo too. And thanks to everyone. Just to conclude, remind you that next week we have another interesting seminar, the last one, where Sabina Alcaire and Fanny Kovetsi are presenting the last this term, a bird's eye view of well-being. It's going to be very interesting, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you for being here, and next week, see you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much for the comments as well. Thank you.